Hello and welcome to Janome Stitch Club UK. My name is Julia Langley and I'm one of the educators here in the UK for Janome. The aim of this YouTube club is to get you to know your sewing machines, maybe use a few more of the stitches, maybe get a bit more creative, look at the functions and the feet that are available for these fantastic machines. And so today I thought we'd have a little look at a Scrappy project. Now some of you may notice this is not my sewing room. We're in the process of moving, so we're having to sort of pack things up. So at the moment I've got a tiny corner of my husband's office. He's not very happy about that because I'm not the neatest person in the world. That's an understatement, but anyway. So I'm in this tiny corner, and one of the issues that I have, well, I don't think it's an issue to be honest, but one of the issues that I have found when I'm packing up my sewing room is the amount of fabrics, and most specifically scraps. I'm not very good at letting scraps go. I love a scrap, and I don't really care what size it is, to be honest. But I've had to be quite hard. I have given away bin bag fulls to friends of mine who do Linus quilts and things like that. But I have retained some, which I'm desperately trying to think of how I'm going to move them to the new sewing room without him noticing. I really hope he's not going to watch this video. I've been discovered. So anyway, one of my favourite things to do with scraps, Exhibit A, is this little pot holder project. Who doesn't love a pot holder? They're great gifts. They're great if you're needing to make something for a little fundraiser, maybe for a sale table or for gifts as well. And they can be done using the tiniest of scraps. These ones have gone, just to put that in there. So they are also a really good opportunity to look at some of the fancy stitches on your machine. I've certainly used a few on this little sample here. So once again, apologies for the mess. This is the pattern that I've used. I've basically I've folded a A4 piece of paper in half. I've drawn a heart, and I'm looking for something. I've got quite small hands, so this heart isn't particularly big. So you might want to make it slightly bigger than this, because by the time we've got a seam allowance on it, it's going to be about that size, which you may well find too small. So the rough measurement is lay your hand down. So you may need a slightly bigger piece of paper, or maybe stick 2 pieces of A4 together so that you can get a slightly bigger heart. You can just do a circular shape as well, nothing to stop you. I've also done these butterfly shape actually, which also look quite cute. These 2 sides here, they are going to be the little sort of pockets where you can pop your hands in. Okay, so that's a very simple pattern. What I've also got is I have sorted out my fabric, so I've got a nice mix of the pinks and blues, and they have been taken from a fairly small scrap, because that's what I'm going to start with in the center of my batting. I'm using Thermolan here because that's got a slight heat resist to it. You could double it if you wanted to. For this sort of thing, single usually, because you've got 2 layers of fabric as well, or you can use the heat resist stuff with the metallic cover as well. But this is going to be my sort of center feature, so that it's all going to sort of come out from here. I don't have to stick with this specific square shape. If I don't want to, I can change that up. But as I say, that is going to be my starting point, and then I've just chosen lots of blues and a little bit of pink as well. Try and get a mix every now and then, maybe try and get something plain in there as well, just to lift the colour. What I've also chosen is a couple of the threads, the contrast. I've gone for the contrast colours here, mainly because I want them to stand out when they actually come onto these colours here. So I had a little root through and to see what I could find. I've also got another piece of thermolan which is going to do those sides here. So like I say, if you've got scraps of this as well, scraps of everything basically, scraps of fabric, scraps of batting, thermolan, etc., it's really going to be a scrappy project. So that's all of my sort of stuff ready to go. So let's turn you around to the actual machine so that we can look at some of the stitches as well. So the stitches I'm looking at are these side-by-side ones here. So feather stitches of all kinds. There's double-sided blanket stitches very often as well. More feather stitches. They don't necessarily have to have a centre line, because when we use our stitch in the ditch foot, that will keep the centre for us. If you don't have that foot, don't worry, because on your regular, and I would say use your F foot for this, but there is, look, a little mark there showing you the centre line, so you just have to eyeball it a wee bit more, or you can use your A foot as well, just whichever foot suits you best. I tend to find the F foot better with decorative stitches because it's got that groove in the bottom, so it's going to give you a little bit more space for these slightly thicker stitches, and it is the one recommended with the machines for decorative stitching. So these are the kinds of things we're looking at. Don't forget, you can also look at your heirloom stitches if you've got them, and some of these fancier stitches as well. It's going to depend, like everything else, on the thickness of the fabric. So some stitches might work better than others. What you might find with some of these more pictorial stitches is that they will work better on a plain fabric. So for example, like I've done here, so it's just running through one layer of fabric and the batting, rather than across here where you've got all the seams and the joins together. Okay, so just have a little play. As I say, this is an opportunity to really take a look at these stitches and play with them. First off, the quilt stitches on my atelier, because I know for a fact that, look, here we go, I'm going to start getting all my feather stitches going along here, and these are the ones, as I said, that I like. But before I do any of that decorative stitching, I'm going to do the flip and stitch first, so that I've got all of my fabrics on, and then I'm going to go back in and do the decorative stitches. You could do it flip, stitch, decorate, flip, stitch, decorate, but for speed it's much easier to do it first and then go in, because I don't need to then keep changing out the foot, because I am going to have my F foot on for this part of the process. So I will probably speed this up a wee bit. Nobody's going to judge you about your seam allowances here. So when I say flip and stitch, this first one here, I don't need to worry about it. I'm just going to pick up one of my pieces of fabric. I'm going to cut it down, and this is a batik, so it's double-sided. I'm using a green thread here just so you can see, actually. So, I mean, it's not going to show on the finished project. I'm going to go onto the actual regular patchwork stitch. So I've got my 1/4 inch, basically. So my needle's just moved into position. There we go. And it's taken my stitch length down as well. So I'm just going to get at the beginning of that seam. And then just so to the end. You can back up if you want, doesn't matter, we're going to be going over the top of all of these seams. And then as you come round, I'm just going to clip it at either end and then flip it. So we're then ready to go in with another piece. So I've also got, look, this rather lovely Japanese print here as well. I think I'm going to end up doing this too straight, aren't I? And I kind of don't want to, because I'm not doing a regular sort of pattern. It's going to turn into, I just know it's going to turn into a log cabin if I'm not careful, and I want it to be way scrappier than that. If you're not doing quite the 1/4 of an inch, don't worry, because as I say, this is a scrappy project. So fold it back, trim away as well, maybe go in with something else. I've got something pink, and this is what I mean about scraps. I really need an intervention, don't I? Crikey. It was shameful. It was shameful. It wasn't easy letting it go either, goodness me. This is the trouble, you see, because I know that I can do things like this with those scraps. That's what makes it so hard. So flip it back and then you can see where to trim it up. And then I can keep on going. So I can stop now because I've got it all covered. I know I kind of folded that so I can center that part of it there. And look, I know that I'm not going to use that, so I can trim away some of these maybe to use, because the next thing I've got to do is those 2 little side bits there, which I might, because I've got a fairly decent size piece here, so I could just do them in one fabric and then just stitch over the top of it, or I could continue on and be a little bit scrappier. But I think I'm just going to use this fabric, and if I've got enough, I will look at the navy. I need to find something to do. I think I've got more of this pink. Yes, I have, to do the actual binding on the sides there. So I've just about got enough of this fabric. I've cut this at an angle because I really am making the most of these scraps here. So I'm going to cut this actually to shape before I go in, and I'm just going to do some straight line quilting or some serpentine stitch, I think, on here. So make sure that you're doing opposite sides. So that's one side done, and this is going to be the other side, just a little tad short there, so I can just move that up, and there we go, and we're just about going to get away with that. There's something very satisfying, isn't there, about getting, it's not something for nothing, because obviously we've bought this fabric in the first place, but it just feels like a bit extra. And often when you've done a big project in something, you either don't want to ever see that fabric again, or you're still got a bit of special place in your heart for it. I think this is a liberty, so couldn't possibly let that go. Ooh. Yes, no, it's a liberty, that one's staying, but yeah, those are staying, but these can go. That's something, isn't it? I'm not doing very well, am I? So I'm going to do a few lines of quilting, and let's find the serpentine. There we go. Not worrying about measuring or anything like that. The point of this project, hence why it's a nice one to do when you're your brain's a bit fried, is you don't have to think too much. And it's actually better if you don't think too much. This I have measured because I know it will look way better if it's measured. I'm going to go back to my quilting stitch so that I'm 1/4 of an inch. There we go. So just folded that in half. You could press it if you're feeling the urge. I did press these fabrics first just to impress you all, but I don't always. When I'm doing this kind of thing, very often I will just go for it because you can press as you go. I'm then going to just trim away a wee bit of that before I bring it over and stitch it down on the other side, because it is quite a narrow binding. Notice I've started in a little bit and I've finished before the end because this is going to be in the seam, so I don't want any extra stitching if it's not necessary there. So that's the 2 little pockets done. I'm not lining those because this felty stuff, I don't really need to. It's not going to be seen, so I'm not going to waste the fabric on that. So the next thing to do is I've got that pink in, so I'm going to start looking at those fancy stitches. So I'm going to change my foot out for the S foot, which is the stitch in the ditch foot. As I say, it's got that lip that's going to sit in the middle for those stitches. So let's pop that one on and then pick a stitch. So I'm going to bring you over here so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to go with a bog standard feather stitch. Oh, this is because you know I like doing grasses and things like that. So can you see I've got a favourite stitch setting saved here. So all I have to do is bring my screen up and then DFT default, and it will go back to its widest setting, which is kind of what I want for here. If you want to finish off your stitches on these decorative stitches like this, some think it depends on the stitch that you're doing, but if you find when you press your lock off it continues to stitch, instead of the lock off, press the reverse button, and what you'll find is it stops exactly there. It doesn't continue. So when you're doing things like this where you want to stop it absolutely in a spot rather than finishing off a stitch, then that's really helpful. So where else have I got? There we go. I've got navy down there. And you see how easily I don't have to, I mean, to be honest with you, I can't actually see because I've got the camera here, but I don't need to because this little foot is doing it for me. So all power to the stitch in the ditch foot. Right, so I'm going to keep that colour in because I'm going to carry on some of the blues, and I'm going to change the stitch. I'm going to go for something a little bit more, what should we go for? How about something like this? That's quite exciting, isn't it? And if I do it, let's move you back. This stand's being quite well behaved. Normally it pings, doesn't it? But if I do it on this one, it's going to show up a little better, hopefully, on the pink side. And like I say, I can't really, I've got the camera is literally here. So keeping straight is actually quite difficult sometimes when I'm filming. But for this particular job, look at that. That little ditch foot is worth its weight in gold. As I say, top stitching as well. It's one of my top picks for top stitching. If you are using your AcuFeed system and you're using your AcuFeed foot, you can get a stitch in the ditch shoe to slip onto your AcuFeed foot, and I would really recommend it. Get the plain one like this and the shoe for your AcuFeed as well. You won't regret it. Right, we're nearly there. Ooh, this one looks nice. So again, I don't want to finish the whole stitch because that's going to take me too far. So I'm using that reverse button, and that's finishing me off. There we go. Ooh, that's a nice one, isn't it? Where shall... Oh, I've got... I might do it down here. Actually, I'm going to try a different one because let's shake it up a bit. There's a similar one. This one here. There we go. I will change the colour out on the thread in a minute as well, because I don't want to use all the same. If I was doing this for an actual quilt block, at this point I would be also not only changing the colour, but maybe changing the thread weight as well. So going in with something like a top stitch thread or doubling the thread, just so as to make the differences show a lot more. There we go. So having finished, here's one I made earlier. So having finished your two little pocket pieces, and these ones are actually pieced scrappily, and look, done a nice decorative stitch on the binding there. This one I didn't fold in half because I had slightly more material, so I just stitched it, flipped it, tucked it under, so I've got a slightly wider binding there. I've pinned my heart back together so that I can now cut the heart shape, cut it to shape. Really, I think it just makes it a little bit easier. So look, oh, scrap pin, scrap pin. Oh, I'm feeling. There we go. So I can take those out. Got this nice little octopus look in the centre there, and I've used some of the thicker stitches here. These two particular favourites of mine. What I did want to show you actually, because it's quite an interesting thing, this is the top. Now I didn't bother to change my bobbin out, so I've actually got a navy blue bobbin in, but look how lovely it looks on the underneath on that stitch, and also this one as well. So bear that in mind with some of these stitches, that sometimes you're better off to do it on the other side of your work so that you can get that slightly different look to it. So we've got that done, and then we're going to place these right side down, and I'm slightly off here in a couple of places, but I'm not going to worry about that because I am going to do a decent size seam just to make sure I'm catching everything in. Now, having done that, we now need to put our backing, has to be right side facing as well. Oh, I'm hoping this is, yes, look, if I do it at an angle big enough, phew. And I'm just going to flip that over and pin it on this side, because this is the side where we can stitch it. And just make sure that, like, that's shifted so that it's all kind of lined up. You can double pin, so you could pin your pockets in first if you wanted to. Stitch all the way. This will make you laugh as well. This is the joy of the Scrappy project. I've got so many scraps knocking around. Look, I've managed to actually stitch one of the random bits into the underneath. But you know what? No one's gonna see that. So I'm not worrying. It's got rid of another scrap, hasn't it? So it's all good. So I'm going to do more like a 1/2 inch seam all the way around here, and I am going to go all the way around. I'm not going to leave a turny hole. I'll show you for why in a minute. So it's all now stitched around, and I'm feeling around to make sure I've caught everything in. It's a bit hard because you can't see through, so that's why I did that slightly larger seam. I've made a hole here, so I've just pulled it up, made a little nick, and then made it into a slightly bigger hole, and that is hidden behind one of the pockets. So that is what I'm going to use to turn it all through. It won't be seen once this is all done, because it will be inside underneath one of the pockets, and you can either slip stitch it by hand or on the machine after the event. So first of all, we get it out this way. So it looks a bit like that, and then the pockets are just going to flip over, and this is what I mean about this gap here. So at this point I can just do a quick slip stitch, stitch that up so that that doesn't, there we go, give it a good press, a bit of a tweak, and that's another one done. Like I say, that needs a bit more of a better turnout. So there we go, little scrappy project for you. Have a little look at some of those stitches and get rid of some of those scraps. And if you want to know, this was a previous project actually that I did on lettering and I think it was patterns. Anyway, I'll put the link to it if you wanted to make one of these for yourself. They're really good actually. If only I adhered to my my own message a little bit more. Look, a little bit more often. Look a bit more often. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that. If you've got any questions at all, do pop them in the comments. I will put the reference numbers for the Stitch in the Ditch for the different machines. Make sure you get the right one for your particular model, and I'll see you again.